Chris Lee and Blake Lovell here to preview the Missouri Tigers for the 2023 football season. Blake, an interesting team, kind of a veteran team, and this is year 4 under Coach Eli Drinkwitz, and it seems like kind of a make-or-break year for he in Missouri after 4 seasons where Missouri has just been the poster child for hovering around 500 so far.
Yeah, it seems like there's, there is that added pressure just because you do want to kind of make that jump at some point. We've seen the good, we've seen the bad, and now I think it's, wanting to see more of the good in one season rather than just kind of being in that middle range. Because we talked about that past couple years, so it will be interesting to see if they can make that jump. I think clearly the defense is going to be the reason why you think they can. When you just look at all the guys they've got returning there and potential breakout stars that come in via the transfer portal. And, this is a team that lost some close games last year. And again, you think about how different the conversation would be if they just found a way to win some of those. But the limitations on offense were one of the reasons why. And I think that will be the main storyline heading into this season, is to see if they can kind of have that breakthrough year on the offensive side, given a lot of interesting options at their disposal, specifically when you look at the quarterback race. But I think the defense, to me, still looking at it overall, is probably going to be what has to sort of carry this team if they're going to make that jump. So,
yeah, looking back at Missouri, you go back to Barry Odom's last year. Missouri started hot, got beat by Vanderbilt, I believe, after a 5-0 start or something like that. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for Barry Odom, who goes 6-6 and loses his job. Eli Drinkwitz comes in the pandemic season, goes 5-5. The second year, 2021, goes 6-7, 3-5 in the league. Last year, same mark. Now, last year, I know that sort of the narrative around Missouri, and if this was true, was that Missouri was, just a couple of games from going 9 wins, which that did happen. That could have happened. The Georgia game is one that obviously we think about. Did get blown out a couple games. Kansas State would have been one of those. Tennessee would have been one of those. Some other close losses. Kentucky by 4 points a game. Frankly, that they probably should have won if not for just a really wild, flukish special teams play where they made the play, but I think got charged with a roughing the punter 40 yards behind the line of scrimmage or something like that. But you look at the numbers, it is amazing. I don't think I've ever seen many teams where just everything was evenly matched. Okay, Missouri last year scored 24.9 points, gave up 25.2 points. It gave up 4.5 yards per running play, averaged 4.7, gave up 6.0 yards per passing play, averaged 6.1, turned it over 2.3% of the time, forced turnovers on 2.1% of the snaps. This was a team that just screamed 500 in every way last year on the whole, Blake, in spite of some of those close losses.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we said, it's a game of inches. That's the phrase that's used when it comes to just that margin for error. And you think about, again, what the conversation would be, just given how a couple of those games played out last season. But at the same time, like we said, it's just been a mix of good and bad. And I think that's what they're trying to. It's fine to. We always say it's like you don't want to be one of those teams just bottoms out, and Missouri hasn't bottomed out under Eli Drinkwitz, but you're kind of caught in that middle, and it's trying to figure out, okay, are we always going to be the team that's just going to be right in the middle, or can we, actually prove that we have the guy that can push us into that next tier? Because what else is going on around Missouri, right? You've got Georgia's defending 2-time champion. You've got Tennessee, who's made their jump. South Carolina, we feel like, has certainly overachieved the past couple of seasons. And so if we just look at the East as a whole, we think Vanderbilt's getting better. Kentucky feels like they will probably be better. So it's really looking at it, I think, in the the context of everything that's around you, and how quickly you can go down in this league. Like, I think that's what's important. So yeah, the fact that they've kind of stayed right there in the middle, again, that's a good thing. But I think Missouri fans are just wondering, when are we able to maybe take that next step? And I think there are some expectations that could happen this season. So
Yeah, staying in the middle is one of the things that'll get you fired faster than anything in college sports. I don't know that it's always fair, but it feels like that's kind of where this team is. And I'm with you. I think this team, I think it's an interesting team. Like, I think that the more that I look at the East, like if you told me Missouri finished second, I wouldn't be totally stunned. I think it's more of a crapshoot of 2 through 5 than maybe perceived. I think Tennessee probably the consensus clear favorite for number 2, and that's probably where I'd put Tennessee, but Missouri's in that next pack of teams that could challenge, and I think it's going to start with offense if it's going to make a jump, and I agree with you. I think defensively they're really good. We'll get into that next, but I was going back and looking at what Brady Cook did a year ago, and when you say best quarterbacks in the SEC, Brady Cook is not going to be the first name off anybody's lips, but I went back and looked last year. He threw for 2,724 yards, 17 touchdowns, 7 picks. That's respectable. I'd forgotten he had run for nearly 600 yards and 6 touchdowns, so I think we tend to overlook rushing yards, but a quarterback who's mobile and can move the ball that way, get you some extra first downs and some things like that. They've got John Garcia from Miami backing him up, and then they've got Sam Horn, who was the very coveted quarterback / baseball pitching recruit who threw, I think, 1 or 2 passes a year ago. It starts in the quarterback room. Again, Brady Cook, not the guy that is going to probably be competing for postseason superlatives, but a guy that is capable certainly of getting Missouri someplace decent, depending on the surrounding cast, which is going to be one of the questions we'll get into momentarily.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have multiple quarterbacks, but it's also nice to have one quarterback and feel so strongly about that guy that you're not really talking about everyone. And I mean that half serious, because obviously it's nice to have options to work with. And I think all these guys are talented in their own right, and they all bring different things, I think, at that position. But we did talk about Brady Cook last year, and I think we kind of talked about him as sort of just that underrated guy that, yes, you could still see some of the things that could frustrate you, but like you said, there are some things just with what he was able to do at times with his legs, some of that by necessity. But there were some things that I think you were seeing that were starting to click with him, and you could see kind of the light bulb go off a little bit, even though this was a team, again, that did struggle overall. I think they finished, I don't know what it was, I think 85th in scoring offense, 90th in passing offense. So it was still something that was not to the standard you need to be, again, a team that can make that next step in the SEC. But I do think he is someone you could see just the experience, just getting the experience of last season and seeing some things start to click. Yeah, I think like I mentioned earlier, I think it's interesting just to look at the different guys that are in that sort of QB battle that they have, but I do feel like at this point, you look at what Brady Cook was able to do from the experience he got last year, and we'll see, because as we'll talk about, there's some guys around him. One guy in particular who left that was a big part of that success, but I think they've at least got some guys around him that if he can put the ball in the right place, I think they've got some guys that can make some plays. But yeah, I think quarterback position is still a question, just because you have a couple of other guys there, and who's going to be the starter? Is there going to be one guy that starts every game? Is there going to be multiple guys that's starting, throughout the season? Because we know sometimes that's not exactly what you're looking for in terms of really just trying to push your offense forward. So,
yeah, the supporting cast in terms of skill players is just on paper pretty pedestrian. And again, that's not bad, but Cody Schrader, a guy who was their main running back a year ago, transferred from Truman State, where he'd had a nice career. And he was a nice player for them last year, 4.4 yards a rush, caught 19 balls for a little bit more. Nathaniel Pete, the Stanford transfer, kind of the same thing, 4.3 yards per rush, can catch a couple of balls out of the backfield. So, look, there are worse running back rooms in the leagues than Missouri's, but it's nobody that probably excites you there or keeps defensive coordinators up at night. Their receiving core is kind of deep with experience. They've got Mookie Cooper, who comes back. He caught 25 balls a year ago. He's an okay player. They got Theo Weiss Jr., who they added from Oklahoma, who caught 19 for 378 last year, 37 for 530 the year before. He was, I think, a 4 or 5-star recruit at OU. Probably didn't live up to the hype, but he'll help. He'll start probably for them at the Z. And, of course, they got Luther Burden III, who really, I think if you look at this, 45 catches for 375 yards. That yards per catch number, I think, more underwhelming than would have thought. He's a very talented player, scored 4 rushing touchdowns. You would think that they would make an effort to get the ball in his hands a little bit more. Dennis Jackson joins him from Ole Miss. I think he didn't play last year because of injury. The year before, he went, 12 for 244 and 2 scores. So maybe a guy that can help. I think he was listed as a third-teamer coming in. They got some other guys. Chance Looper, who played a little bit for them, 2 years ago, I think was hurt last year, didn't play. So, again, I look at this. They got parts with experience, but other than Luther Burden III, who, of course, was that 5-star recruit and very talented player who could become a playmaker for them, not a lot to be concerned about, but not a lot maybe to get excited about either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the running back group is solid. I feel like they were pretty consistent in terms of what they could do. But again, I think some of that is just kind of the nature of the offense itself last year. And, we talked about, I mean, their defense kept them in a lot of games, and it was just a matter of how they approach things on offense. So I think you've got a solid group there. Schrader and Pete, we talked about them. But I think Burden is still the guy. And I feel like we said this last year going into the season. We're like, if they're going to become a playmaking offense that just, is regularly making big plays, and we know that's kind of the piece of the puzzle now in this era is just having those guys who can at any time just, reel off those just huge, long plays. I still think Burden's the guy that can do that. And like you said, the average and the yards per catch, those kind of things, I get it. But I think when you look at this overall, like he has to be the guy because of Dominic Lovett leaving. And, we know, again, he was someone that could break off a big play at any time. And so, I mean, that again is what's going to be able to kind of give you an idea of where this offense is at, is if they have a Luther Burden, knowing that he's going to have a lot of the attention on him. You talk about Weeze coming over from Oklahoma. I think he's going to add more production just because of, I think just the skill that's there. But still curious to see, kind of, we talked about the quarterback position and just kind of the playmakers around that spot, but I think it's still a group that has a lot to prove. And not that the talent isn't there, but I think it is seeing how all of that comes together and, having a new offensive coordinator and seeing if he can push the right buttons to get everybody, kind of in that spot. And as we always say, there's going to be someone that kind of is probably a breakout type guy that we're not even talking a lot about. It happens every year in the SEC on multiple teams. But I think right now it's that they've just got to be more explosive, I think, as an offense. Even though, like we said, we can say that, but the defense will keep them, I think, in positions where they don't have to score a lot of points. But I do think they need to probably show off a little bit more of that explosiveness if they're going to take if they're going to move in the right direction as an offense. And I think that involves pretty much everyone, at the top positions, at quarterback, running back, wide receiver. They've just got to show off a little bit more of that consistency and just the overall, like I said, that big playability, which I think, without a Lovett there, that's probably the one thing that you're looking at and just wondering if you're going to be able to get that consistently from other guys, which I think Burden's the obvious choice for someone that can bring that.
Now, Blake, here's where I think they could be a little sneakily better than people expect. I look at that offensive line. They got a lot of dudes who played a lot of ball. You start at left tackle where Javon Foster is probably regarded as one of the league's better pass blockers. He played almost 900 snaps a year ago, I think started every single game. At left guard, they've got Xavier Delgado, who started, I think, all the games last year or close to it. Actually, he looks like he missed a game. Had nearly 800 snaps. They brought in Cameron Johnson from Houston to play center. He had over 900 snaps a year ago. At right guard, it looks like they move their guards around a little bit depending on what depth chart you look at, but Mimbu and Walters both had about 500 snaps a year ago, so in tandem they've got a starting guard there, I guess, in some combination in terms of the playing time from a year ago. And then they brought in Marcellus Johnson from Eastern Michigan to man right tackle, and last year he had over 900 snaps for a MAC team. I don't know how that translates, but one thing you do like to see is a lot of guys, and Connor Tollison too, still around. He had over 800 snaps a year ago. There's not a lot of teams in this league, Blake, and maybe not anybody who, if you take their top 6 or 7 linemen, got more snaps than the guys, more snaps a year ago than the guys Missouri will be lining up this year.
Yeah, more experience for sure. I think that was something I had in my notes, just kind of looking at the makeup and the potential rotation on this line. I mean, yeah, I think more experience is definitely the one thing that stands out, and it is kind of a new look group. But like you said, you've got guys coming in who have played snaps, and that's always important too. And so I think just that added experience will make them better there. And as we always say, it will make, I think, just the offense itself better, because it all starts with the line. I mean, being able to do things, as we know, starts on the line of scrimmage. And I think just having this group in place, like you said, I think they've got options, and that's always nice to have on the offensive line, given the grind that you're facing in the SEC and just what you're going to see on the other side on the defensive line. Injuries happen. It's a grind of a season. So the fact is they've got multiple guys who have experience. They played some snaps. And so, yeah, I think that will be something that can probably help this offense as a whole be better, is just the fact that I do feel like the offensive line is more experienced and should be, I think, better in that area.
One thing I forgot to lead with, too, and this is a little bit of a story. I don't know how much things will change, but Eli Drinkwitz had been his own offensive coordinator the whole time he's been at Missouri. Yeah, now he's got Kirby Moore from Fresno State. Again, I don't know how much that changes things. They were pretty balanced a year ago. They were nearly 50-50 in terms of run-pass attempts. But I think this team, if it's going to be really good, again, the offense is going to have to step up, and that might be the X factor. But where their bread is going to be buttered is on defense. And I think their coordinator, Brad Baker, was probably one of the more under-the-radar, underappreciated stories in the league a year ago. Look, when you go 6-7, nobody's going to be talking about you a whole lot unless you're Texas A&M or someone like that. But he took a defense that had just been lousy and turned it into a very respectable and sometimes fairly good unit a year ago. We usually start, and we kind of start on the front 7 as we go through these in order. But if we did that, we're kind of bearing the lead. And this is a situation where they bring back all 4 starting defensive backs. All of them we do a lot of show prep for these things, but these were all names that I knew without having to dig in a lot. I think all of them started all the games a year ago or are pretty close to it. Rakestraw broke up 14 passes at one corner. They got 2 safeties that made a lot of plays a year ago. I just think this secondary for Missouri, Blake, Joseph Charleston was really good at strong safety. Jalen Carles was really good. I think might have led them in tackles a year ago. And that's another thing on this defense. You start looking down the tackle leaders from a year ago, and most of them were back across the board. But I think when you've got guys who played in this league this long in the secondary, Chris Abrams-Drain, the other guy I just blanked on, 14 pass breakup as a year ago. I really like what they start with on their back 4, and that is a luxury that I don't know anybody else in the league is going to have what Missouri's got in terms of lining up with the experience at their 4 DBs.
Yeah, I mean they got multiple guys that you're going to see on all SEC type teams. I think just because again what they've already proven, but now they come back for another year, and it's that added year of experience given what this team accomplished last year, and so I think that they will easily be one of the best when it comes to that, because I mean this was the most improved defense in the league last year. One of the more improved ones nationally. We just look at what they were able to do. I mean, look at all their SEC games last year, right? Like every SEC game except for one, they held their opponents to 27 points or less. And of course, the one we know was Tennessee, who's just has had their number, as we know, over the past couple of years in terms of just putting up a ridiculous amount of points. But in all the other games, they're all decided. Arkansas scored 27, Georgia scored 26. And when we think about kind of this era of offense in college football, it was remarkable to see what they could do to kind of slow down some of those teams. And like you said, a big reason for that was just their ability not to give up a lot of those huge plays, those, back-breaking plays. They can just change a game. They didn't give up a ton of those, and they were able to limit the scoring for some of these teams. And a big reason, again, is kind of that looking at that back group in the secondary. And just, yeah, I mean, I think this is a very, very talented group there just at that position. And so they're going to be a lot of fun to watch in terms of just being able to remember too. We talk about the quarterbacks that are in the league this year. You can lead with whoever you want. Jaden Daniels, which they're not going to see, I don't think, on the schedule, are they? Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are playing LSU. I don't even have the schedule pulled up, but they do have LSU on October the 7th. So when you kind of go down their schedule, you got a Jaden Daniels. You're going to play a Devin Leary. Spencer Rattler, we talked about, could be some good. Kind of maybe takes a step forward. Carson Beck at Georgia, Joe Milton at Tennessee. I'm just looking down their schedule here. KJ Jefferson. You're going to play a lot of good quarterbacks. And so having this group that they have in place and then that back part of the defense is a nice luxury to have.
There's a couple other things I like. One of them's depth. I'll get into that next. But we talked about the secondary, but you could debate their best two defenders could be Darius Robinson, who they'll move around a little bit. He's considered by some their best pro prospect, and Tyron Hopper, who came in as a transfer a year ago and just made a ton of plays. I mean, those are two dudes that could be guys that we see end of the year all SEC teams for sure.
I would say could be among the best at their position in the league. And remember, it's the SEC, right? And there's a lot of good players at those positions, especially on the defensive side. When you talk about just on the defensive line and linebacker and those things. So, yeah, I mean, that speaks to what they've done there at Missouri to be able to kind of just develop these guys into the players that they are and, putting it all together, I think is, we saw that last year. And now I think we just look at what these guys can do. It's going to help in a lot of areas. Going to be able to help in terms of the pass rush. Going to be able to help in terms of their ability to stop the run. And so, I mean, we can go down the list here. Think about all the players you've mentioned in the past couple minutes. Like, these are all impact players on the defensive side. Like, these are not just guys filling spots. Like, these are guys that make an impact and they make plays. And so when you combine all that together, you can see why they were so improved last year. But now you get this many guys back. I mean, they are going to be one of the most fascinating defenses in the SEC. And that's saying something given how many, great defensive coordinators there are in this league, how many great, head coaches there are that kind of specialize in defense and those. Like, this is a group that is really going to excel. And, barring injuries and those kind of things, I think this is one that, again, is going to keep Missouri in that category in terms of being right there in probably most of the games they play, just because their defense can be that good, I think, to keep them right there with an opportunity. So.
Yeah, we're doing this mid-July. We're going to SEC Media Days next week, and I'll start doing my prep on filling out our picks and our SEC teams. But I guarantee you I'm going to have several guys off this defense that'll be on my short list and will probably be on my final ballot. Certainly Tyron Hopper, I can't imagine him not being on one of my top two teams, and probably Chris Abrams-Drain too, who was just so productive for them a year ago. But here's the other thing. The more you look, it keeps getting a little bit better, because I'm a big believer. I mean, this is not revolutionary, but you need to have bodies up front with experience or elite talent, or preferably both, to really win in the SEC. I'm looking at their defensive line. They got Jaden Jernigan back to start at one spot. His backup, Josh Landry, played a ton a year ago. Those guys played 13 and 12 games. They got Christian Williams at the other tackle returning. He was productive a year ago. Relis George backs him up. Both those guys played 13 games. They hit the portal with decent success. They bring in Niles Gaddy to back up at one end. Jacksonville State is now going to D1. Last year, he had 56 tackles, 11 stops for loss, 7 sacks, 3 hurries. I don't know how that translates to the SEC, but that's a depth piece there. Other than Hopper, they've got Chad Bailey, who played a lot last year at linebacker. He'll start at one spot. One of their leading tacklers, Damon Wilson, played a decent amount as a backup. They bring in Trevez Johnson to back up Dalen Carnell at that star position. Carnell had a pretty underrated year. Broke up 6 passes, had 3 picks, which I think led the team. Johnson was a guy that was very productive at Florida a year ago. They bring in Joe Moore at Arizona State, who had 38 tackles a year ago. Again, I don't know if these guys are going to be guys that are headliners and names people know, but you look for teams. Do they have enough bodies? Do they have a lot of depth? Can they withstand injuries? And I think that's a box that Missouri is going to check too, just as you look down the roster.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, they've got to replace Isaiah McGuire. And I think just having, a lot of different options. I mean, this is a guy who was drafted in the 4th round. He had 7.5 sacks last year, 13 tackles for loss. That was second. 39 tackles overall. So, yeah, I mean, finished with what? I think 17 sacks or something like that in his career. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's what you're looking for is knowing you have to replace a guy like that. And again, there are other guys too, but I think that's one of the big things you look at. And I think just with all the different guys we mentioned, they have the option to do that. Maybe just, maybe you have to switch a couple things around and maybe there's not going to be one guy that does that necessarily. But I think just the different options at their disposal, that is what really stands out. Like you said, the depth on this defense for sure.
Last thing, we always try to mention special teams. Missouri's got one of the better kickers in the country in Harrison Mevis, who had an off season last year. But if you're going to line up a guy to kick a 50-yard field goal with the game on the line, he'd be one of my first picks. They bring in a punting transfer from Towson State. Don't know what else to say, but sometimes when you're a team that's in a lot of close games, and they kind of hurt Missouri a year ago, Mevis was not quite maybe the All-American that he had been built up to be. And sometimes that just happens to a kicker for whatever reason. But that's something to watch, too. If they're in close games, Mevis is a guy, even though it didn't go as well for him a year ago, I would like my chances with him with the game on the line.
Yeah. So, I mean, just as long as you put yourself in that position to give him the scoring opportunities. And again, to me, that kind of wraps everything up in terms of it's all about kind of what this offense looks like. And I think that's the biggest fascination I have with this team is just what is this offense going to look like? Like we said, who's the quarterback in week 1? Who's the quarterback in week 4 and week 8? Is it the same person? And are they excelling at that position? What has Kirby Moore done to be able to kind of revamp some of these areas we know they need to be better at? We know they lost a top star in Dominic Lovett. How do they replace that? Can Luther Burden take that big jump? Can the other guys around him be able to kind of fill that void because he was such a, there's a reason he's playing for Georgia now, right? And so I think that is just the biggest question I have is they have to improve in some of those offensive areas. The numbers speak for themselves. If they can do that with the defense that they have, they can definitely be a sleeper team in this league because they have the defense to support a really good season. They just need the help on the offensive side.
Well, and here's the other thing we discussed, and this is the thing that could get in the way. This will be Drinkwitz's 4th year, and I think something's expected better than 6 wins this year. I mean, the last guy that went 6-6 got fired 4 years ago. So I think that the bar of expectations is going to be higher. And if they get late in the season, have lost a couple of close games, and there's talk of coaching searches and everything, that's kind of the other dynamic I'm watching. Because I think this is a team, again, that's good enough to surprise. But if it doesn't go well, if they lose some close games as they did a year ago, that could be a distraction that creeps in.
Well, and the problem is there's not really many gimmies right on their schedule because, I think that's always something, too, we look at. And we've talked about their schedule in a separate video. You can find it on the channel. Just search for Missouri schedule preview. But, we kind of talked about MTSU in week 2. You've got Kansas State, that game still in there. You've got Memphis in there and St. Louis. Your road games at Vanderbilt, at Kentucky, at Georgia, at Arkansas. You got home games against South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida. Then you get LSU out of the West, the defending division champion over there. So like right now, in all honesty, Chris, it's like they're probably going to win, a game or two that they shouldn't because they'll probably be, I don't know what those games are right now, right? The game at Vanderbilt, we think Vanderbilt's going to be better. What's the spread on that game right now? Probably not too many points. I don't think Missouri's favored by a touchdown or anything like that in that game if you had to set the line right now. And that again comes out to those games like Florida. We don't know where Florida's going to be November the 18th. We don't know what to expect from Florida. Arkansas, that's a tough road game, even though I think Arkansas is a team that has something to prove too. So yeah, there's a lot of those games, but I go back to what I said at the start. I would find it hard to believe, maybe the Georgia game, depending on where Georgia's at. I mean, that's probably one that's going to be a struggle, but in all honesty, every other game on the schedule with their defense, I feel like they have a chance, and they're at least, in a position where they probably are going to play a lot of those close games again. But can you just get that extra boost from the offense to score that extra touchdown, to get those, 2 extra field goal opportunities to give you an extra 6 points? That could be the difference in a lot of these games, because I think if you had to set the line right now for a lot of Missouri's games, I can't imagine there are many of them on the schedule that are more than a touchdown or maybe less. Again, the Georgia game is probably one that would be, but all the others, like, Kansas State's probably a top 25 team, but at the same time, that game's in Columbia. LSU, we know is a top 10 team. That game's in Columbia. So, and what Blaine always says, right, and we've kind of talked about as a theme, crazy things just seem to happen there in Columbia in some of these games. We saw it last year against Georgia. So, I don't know. I think, we probably said this with other teams too, but I think Missouri is one of the more intriguing teams in the league heading into the season, because it does feel like kind of that make or break year, but it also feels like there's a lot of ways this thing could go. So,
yeah, and I think the key stretch of that schedule, and people are going to say, what? Probably when I say this, but I think it could be that 3-game stretch, Kansas State, Memphis, and Vanderbilt. And this is why, because if you lose 2 of those 3, and that could happen, then yes, it sets up for a potential rough finish, and it's going to be coaching change hanging over everyone's head from midseason on, if that's the way it goes. Fair or not?
Theoretically, after that, the LSU, Kentucky, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee stretch, theoretically, all 5 of those teams could be ranked. As of right now, they probably 4 of those minus South Carolina. But South Carolina could be ranked at that point, right? Like, we don't know. But so yeah, it's just, yeah. So it's an unforgiving schedule, but we say that about all the SEC schedules for the most part. And so, yeah, I think it all goes back to the offense for me. I think that's the key here, because I don't really expect the defense to take a step back at all. I think if anything, they're as good as they were last year, or maybe even better. So.
We are about halfway through our previews for SEC football for the coming season. Again, we're doing this mid-July. We'll be at Media Days. Next week, as we do this, we're going to be previewing every single SEC team in depth for the season. Best way to get that, hit that subscribe button. And if you hit the like button and tell a friend, those things help us out too. We also cover basketball on the men's side, and occasionally some women's too, and baseball. So we're kind of your one-stop shop for SEC men's coverage. That's right, our friend Dennis Gates. We give Dennis Gates a lot of FaceTime. Can Dennis Gates coach football?
Well, I'm contractually obligated to say his name in any video regarding Missouri, whether in any sport. So just forgot to do that towards the end. So I apologize for everyone who had to wait 33 minutes, but Dennis Gates. Yeah,
Missouri fans, if you're still watching at this point, drop Dennis Gates in the comments. But in any case, yes, when Dennis Gates news breaks, Blake will have you covered.
I'll have you covered.
And again, hit the subscribe button so you make sure you don't miss that, because it's good stuff. All right, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon with more Southeastern Conference sports content.